All right, it's 8 minutes after the hour of 7 o'clock. Welcome back to the program here on TTT. And we have with us economist Mariano Browne to talk to us about all these nice budgetary promises. But more importantly, with COVID-19 2 years in, what's the economic outlook for Trinidad and Tobago? Last IMF report was suggesting that there might be some growth. But what's the reality on the ground? Good morning to you, Mariano.
Good morning, good morning.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, and Happy New Year to all your listeners.
So tell me why you're laughing. Every time you laugh, I get nervous, you know.
Well, Happy New Year. It's a new year, it's starting over.
Right. And do you think that Trinidad and Tobago's economy is at that point where it has to start over? Or are we just kind of continuing but trying to pick up speed?
Well, at some stage of the game, it must start over. I mean, if you keep going down, at some stage of the game, you must bottom out. The positive changes that have taken place over the last year, the firming up in the energy prices. That's it. That's the only significant change that we've had. And of course, we've started to open back up, so we'll have a higher level of economic activity we had before. So if you add those two things together, there should be some sort of increase. Yeah. Some sort of positive movement in the economy.
But from what the central bank report is telling us, though, things seem a little bit sticky, if I can put it that way, in terms of inflation, whether core inflation, whether, you know, food inflation. Is that there is some inflation there? And how is that going to affect the bottom line?
Oh, well, it's going to make everything much more expensive. I think as we started to see that, price of beer, the price of food, price of flour, price of everything. And it goes back to the 2002 2013-14 period, where essentially we had what was known then as a super commodity cycle. What happens is that because of China's growth and its purchasing power, in fact, as an economy, it was getting so large, it changed the demand for literally almost everything, so that prices went up, and literally it made construction very expensive. Price of steel went up, price of every commodity you could think of, rice, flour, everything, pork. As simple as things like that. Now we have inflation coming from two sides. One, because of, and there's some contradictory effects. One, because of the shutdown effects all over the world. It means that if people are not going to work, therefore they're not working. The factories are on short staff, alternatively short production. So when the world starts reopening and demand goes back up to normal levels, then there's a shortfall. And that has translated itself into two things. First one is inflation, and that hasn't been helped by the fact that some economies have been in expansionary mode. In the US in particular, they've had approximately injections into the system, which is about $3 trillion, which has increased demand at a time when there are shortfalls. The second part of that is that when the shutdown occurred, ships stopped, movement stopped, the containers were in the wrong places. It would take about 18 months for that to fall back into position. And that's what has translated in what they call supply chain bottlenecks. Yeah. So there are two influences, both of them are negative.
So then how will this whole idea of quasi-safe zones in public sector help or hurt in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, considering where we are and with the shutdowns and, you know, with people not being out for a while and trying to build that back up? How will this help or will it hurt?
Well, it will help, because what they're trying to do is get everybody back into the office, or get everybody back to working, whether they work from office or work from home. We don't have the sort of sophisticated mechanisms which allows you to literally run from distance. There are all sorts of issues with regard to Wi-Fi, whether they have enough space capacity in the houses to allow people to do that, whether there are enough computers in position. So that the whole idea of a safe zone is really to get everybody back into the office, or get as many people back into the office. Things are going to change. It's not going to be the same as normal, but to get as many people back into the office and get as many things back up to normal. Now, in terms of COVID, there are only two things we know that works. One is vaccination, and the other is preventative measures, just as we are doing. Yeah. So that's the idea behind the safe zone. The difficulty with that, of course, is that the vaccination program has slowed down substantially. There are segments of the population that are resistant, that are hesitant, and part of that problem has to do with how the vaccine program has been rolled out. And there's been no change in policy. If you run into a situation where you reach a stage and you're not getting the efficacy, then you have to do something different. telling everybody they have to go back to work creates some issues, as we've seen. There's some pushbacks from the union, from the uniformed services in particular. So it has to be handled diplomatically. The editorials, I think, this week, certainly in the Express, certainly caught the mood in that one. In that if we're saying that we're going to have policy, then we have to articulate the policy better, or alternatively, spell it out. So, for example, in the meeting between Faris Alwari is heard to say that the unions didn't come with any policy. Well, I haven't seen any policy initiative on behalf of the government either. So you can pot calling kettle back. If you are the one who is setting the standard, then by definition, you have to put a policy on the table. This is what I'm going to do. This is why we're going to do it. This is how we're going to do it. These are the exceptions. This is how we're going to treat with the exceptions. These are the positive things we're doing to support it on the other side of the fence. But we haven't had that statement. We haven't seen that type of action from government. So going back to the beginning, where we were, the IMF had also predicted growth of 4% last year.
Yeah.
It was minus 0.1. The bottom line is that the new variants of COVID could upset any projection moving forward in the future. But we know we have two positives. The price of energy has gone up, and we probably have sort of bottomed out. So that will be some sort of fillip. Whether it will grow by 5.3% or somewhere between 0 and 5.7, one can't say. So the best one could say is that there will be some growth, it will be positive, but it's not going to be sufficient to change the fiscal deficit. And I think that's the most important thing that we have to follow through.
So you're saying that regardless of if we have growth, that the fiscal deficit will not change?
No.
So how do we fix that? Because if we have growth, you'd want to believe that there would be some more injection of revenue for the government stream, and therefore you'll be able to bridge a gap a little bit.
Well, let's put it this way. If the government deficit was $15 billion because they had to spend more relative to the income, we presume that as COVID declines, well, that's a big assumption, then you'll have to spend less. In that sense, the deficit will come down. To the extent to which the energy sector improves, which is about 12%, and that means there'll be some positive revenue flows from that. My understanding is that will translate into about $1.5 billion extra in revenue. Now, the Trinidad and Tobago deficit has hovered between $7 and $12 billion. In that context, $1.5 billion in extra revenue doesn't solve the problem.
You think that's all the revenue that will be had, extra revenue? 1.5 billion, that's it?
Well, we'll make it 2 then.
It's still not 5 and 7.
Make it 3. But it's not going to be 5, it's not going to be 7. And that's the issue.
So let's just go back a little bit and talk about some of these budgetary promises that was made by the Minister of Finance. I mean, one of them we've been talking about is the liberalization of the fuel market, you know, and... All right, let me hear you, because he's laughing. I'm just here asking.
Well, you liberalize the fuel market when the prices are low, so people enjoy the benefit of the decrease in prices. He didn't do that. Well, where are energy prices? Well, they've gone back up. So if you're going to liberalize the market, the net effect of liberalization essentially is to allow the inflation rate to pass through. Well, you know what's going to happen when that happens. Right, everybody's going to start claiming for increases in X, increases in Y, and you end up in an inflationary spiral. So,
so you don't think now is a good time to do that?
Well, the time to have done it, it literally has passed. And the reason why I suspect the minister didn't do it is that because of the change in prices, change in international, remember we import all of our fuel now, right? So whatever happens on the international market flows right through to the pump. So if the prices of the international market are firming, then by definition and going up, then the prices of the pump will go up if you have a liberalized market. Now, when the prices fell and they were down at $30-something, if you liberalize the market at that stage, you operate in a much lower numbers. Effectively, by not liberalizing the market, what you did is take advantage of the difference in the prices that you are charging, which are the official prices, which governments have set, and the lower prices. So government essentially have a net tax take. Now the prices have started to go back up, and the margin that the government would have had is starting to disappear. We're in subsidy territory. So anytime that you remove you liberalize the market, effectively you're allowing for prices to flow right through at the pump. So that's increased prices. That feeds into the narrative of inflation.
Right, and not only that, the cost of living, which we've seen a lot of
Correct.
people are grappling with already. So then what happens? What would you suggest as an economist that should be done at this point?
Well,
because if you're saying that the time has passed to liberalize the prices at the pump, then what do we do?
No, the time has passed for the benefit of liberalization to the public. Right? I think that they're still in the position where they have to liberalize. It's a catch-22 situation. If you don't liberalize, then you're in a subsidy position. Well, can you afford an additional subsidy if you've been running deficits? The answer to that is no. So I don't think there's any doubt that he has to liberalize at some stage of the game, if only to avoid
we've had subsidies over the years, Mariano, even though we've always run deficit budgets.
Yes, but there comes a point in time where it has to stop. We have been running a deficit budget for 11 years. 11 years. And we were in a situation where we were actually borrowing to pay salaries. It's been that bad. So that is what is called a primary deficit. A primary deficit is that literally you're struggling to just meet basics. And that is reflected in literally all the corporations or state enterprises where the budgets have been cut. Now, after you've done that period, if the economy isn't, the one way to do it is to grow yourself out of that situation. Now, the point I was making just now is that even if you have 5% growth, which is the most optimistic point, it's not going to be sufficient to take you out of that deficit. You have to try to get the economy to keep growing on its own. Now, that means all of the changes that you ought to put in the position, the fiscal incentives for all the other parts of the sectors that you needed to put in, because these things don't happen overnight. They take time. They take time to happen. They take time to respond to the fiscal incentives. Those are things that you ought to have done in 2015. If you're doing them in 2022, 2023, the effect is going to be somewhere down the road in 2026, 27, 28, right? So there's a hiatus period, and that's where we are. So that the decisions that are being made now, we're not going to see the benefit of them for the next 5 years. That's post-election.
Yeah. So you're saying that there is possibility of growth, and there might be some growth, even just based on the fact that energy prices have increased.
Just a mere return to normal activity will lead to some growth relative to where we were, because the decline was so steep.
Yeah.
So that's a positive thing. But for it to reverse the situation that we've been in, that takes time. Coming out of this situation is not a 1 year, 2 year, or 5 year exercise. It's 10 to 15 years. This is time. This is really what it takes place. When we went into depression in 1986, and what we've been experiencing actually is very, very close to that. The only difference has been that we had a Heritage and Stabilization Fund, and that we had sufficient reserves that could have cushioned the decline. When you look at the reserves have declined, notwithstanding all the international borrowings that we've done. The reserves have declined by between about 6.7 relative to where we started off at about $10 billion. So we've gone down about 30 to 40% drop in the reserves. And that is notwithstanding the fact that we've been borrowing in US dollar terms, which pumps up the reserves. So there's been a serious net decline.
Yeah.
Correcting that situation takes time. Can't do it overnight.
What do you think happens for the next 11 months? Because for Trinbagonians, yes, we understand the economics. Yes, we understand the macroeconomics, that these things might take time. But for the average man on the street who is struggling now, what do you think are some of the incentives that can be put in place to just cushion that level of living? There's
nothing that no incentive you could put in the position to cushion that. Those are external, they're large, they're significant. The central bank report last week, we're talking about inflation somewhere in the region about 30%. Well, how do you cushion that? Even if government were, for example, and let's just say that you were very liberal and that you wanted to push up salaries, and salaries took place, so how are you going to fund it? All that does is increase your deficit. Right? You're not going to be able to fund it. So the bottom line is that there have to be some shift in consumer preferences, computer taste, and consumer expenditures. Government has to do the same thing. This is going to be a very, very tough period, growth or no growth.
Well, I am here trying to figure out what we're going to do. Look at Rocco's face. Rocco's is looking like...
Where's the hope?
Yeah. Where's the hope?
There's always... some things come to an end. The point is, the longer...
And hopefully when the pandemic comes to an end, that will...
Well, that will help
shift things.
Gets us back on the right track. and the world will be back on the right track. This has been literally, in 2 years, this has been the sort of deepest fall that the world has faced. And it comes on the back of a 2008 recession, which was global. So that whilst you were just in recovery mode, everything just dropped. So this is going to be a very difficult period coming out of it. Now the hope is, and the thing about it is that dark days never last forever. But the point is that you have to have a comprehensive suite of policies that work together for it to happen.
Do we have those?
So the incentives that are taking place now, the question one would ask is, are they deep enough? Are they enough? Are they sharp enough? You can't do anything about the timing they're taking place today. Right? We are faced with the issue for climate change. That's even becoming more of an issue. How is that going to affect our position in the energy sector? The Minister of Energy has said, well, they have 10 years again in oil. Well, I mean, and just look at our long-term position in oil. We've moved from 240,000 barrels to 60,000 barrels. That's a 75% drop over time. And oil was our strong point. We have a 75% drop.
Well, no, gas is our strong point.
We have a 40% drop in terms of production. Right? And even with we have a new bid round, we're looking for incentives, we're looking to essentially basically pump up production. Production with Angeline and Juniper only carried us back up to from 3.3 to 3.6. Right? And now we are down to 2.6. Right? All of that has taken place in the space of, what, 3 years? Right? So we're talking about we are 40% off the top. Now, you can't replace 40% just like that. You can't replace it overnight.
It's going to take some time.
It takes time. And that's one of the reasons why I'm saying it's all well and good to talk about we're going to have everything's going to be donkey-dory and so on. But not now. It's going to take time. And that's where the conversation, the communication, the policies that have to fall into position have to address those issues. Yeah. And they have to address a segment of the population that is going to fall below the poverty level. How many are they? How big is it?
Yeah, well, since we had our budget talk, we recognize that we don't have that kind of data. Well, but we have to leave it there. I don't know where the time goes. But yeah.
It goes quickly.
Yes. But Mariano, I want to thank you so much. I'm hoping that, just going forward, that the government takes a stock of where it's at. And as you said, that it's not going to fix something in 2022, but just that whatever policy decisions and whatever incentives are put in place, we may be able to reap the benefits down the road. So let's hope for the best.
I think we all live in that hope.
Yeah. All right, Mariano Browne, economist, there talking to us. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, a tribute to Kenny J. Stay with us. Money, money, money. Money, money, money. Money, money, money.